the final episode of our summer content. This is Before the Pulpit. This is the first year that we've done this particular show. The design of it is not just for preachers, but also for everyone in the congregation. We hope and pray that this season has been beneficial to you and that it is something that you will take away and maybe share with others. As a little bit of housekeeping before I allow our guest today to introduce himself. Of course, I'm your host, Michael Clark, and we have Wayne Rogers as the co-host with me today. Wayne has to be here, but we are glad that he is. Our guest, though, in just a moment will introduce himself. We're so grateful that he is here and that he is going to spend some time studying with us. We're also grateful to the House to House Studios. They take such good care of us. We are blessed tremendously to work with them. And we're so thankful to have had the time this week to film the programs that we filmed. We filmed What Would You Do If, Text Takeaways, Before the Pulpit, and Did That Really Happen here in studio. And usually that's because we come up for about a week and we get as much recorded as we can. And also because it's the final episode, and I knew if I did this all season, he'd want to hurt me. We're also grateful to Adam Vaughn. Adam works so hard, does a great job. He built this set for us and put it together so we could then come in and put all of our knick-knack, paddywhack, give a dog a bones on the shelves. And we're just grateful for the hard work that he does every time we're here. If you ever are watching something from International Gospel Hour, Good News Today, or the House to House Studios, it is likely that he had some role in that producing of those content and those programs. And so thank you, Adam, for all your hard work. We're also grateful to the Memphis School of Preaching. Without them, there would be no Scattered Abroad Network. The network would not exist without MSOP. And so we're grateful that we're a work of the school and that we have the ability to give back to the great school that gave us all of the time and dedication and training us to preach the gospel. And today our guest is a graduate of MSOP, as so many of our guests this season have been. And we'll introduce him at this time. Anthony Dismuke, tell us who you are, about your family, and also what year you graduated and where you work.
Okay. My name is Anthony Dismuke, and 32 years of age. Don't feel like it all the time, but feel a little older sometimes.
What's your birthday?
90 in June 20th.
So you're just a few months older than I am then, yeah.
Yes, sir.
Nice.
Yes, sir. So graduated from Memphis School of Preaching in 2021. Soon thereafter, I got married to my wife, Raven, and we now have two children, Anthony Dismuke Jr. and Ace. And so it's a bunch of fun. They're at home sick right now, all of them, but I escaped, and so we're here.
Yeah. Yeah. Where do you work?
I work at Eastern Meadows Church of Christ in Montgomery, Alabama. So,
absolutely.
Lovely work. We enjoy it.
It's a good congregation.
Glad you're there. And I actually, as I introduced the program now and what we're actually talking about, that's why we have Anthony for this specific topic. Eastern Meadows is a congregation that has a wide variety of age ranges that are represented there. Today's episode is entitled Preaching to the Back Row. We don't mean the back row in the sense of what we sometimes associate the back row with people if they slip in and they slip out. We mean, how do you communicate the message to every person in the congregation, from the front pew all the way to the back pew? It is often the case that families that are attending are sitting on the back row or sitting close to the exit because if a child starts to cry or needs to be taken out for some reason, you don't want to walk up 40 rows of pews to get them to the back. And so how do you make the message relational? How do you do this? And how do you function as a gospel preacher when you have a wide variety of age ranges? Not every congregation is blessed to have this, though that is always the goal. And so today, as we talk about this mindset of preaching to the back row, we have someone here who can actually speak to that because every Sunday and Wednesday, that's his task. Wayne, let's kick it off.
Anthony, we think about preaching, and one of the things certainly we learned in preaching school and just speech classes, and you always want to know your audience.
Right.
And so knowing your audience is a big part of this, but making the message of the gospel available to everyone in the congregation, and a congregation so diverse of ages and backgrounds at Eastern Meadows especially, gives you a unique perspective, I think, to answer this. But how do you address all those different ages, the young, the middle-aged, the elderly, the youngest in the congregation? How do you do that?
I think that this is it's a great question, great topic. I think this is the difficulty for every preacher, right? each week, what do I say? What do I do? And how can I reach and be effective? Especially like you say, to everyone. And the way I approach things in my preaching is I try to make things as simple as possible. And I look for simple things that I could find throughout scripture that maybe can be an example to me to help me to say, this is how things should go. And who better to look to than to Jesus to try to figure out, how do I accomplish? The greatest preacher we know is Jesus Christ. And so how do I accomplish this? And when I thought about that very thing, when you look at the great sermons that Jesus did, and let's think about Matthew 5, the Sermon on the Mount. When you think about that sermon, it does not ever address the demographics or the age ranges that are presented, but it just tells us multitudes of people are gathered together. Right. And what Jesus does is just simply preaches the message. He preaches what's right, and he preaches his gospel, and knows that it's able to reach everybody everywhere, no matter where you are. So I even think about that even further when you think about what we would call sometimes children's stories. When we talk about spiritually, children's stories, what we say are children's stories, are not actually children's stories. So in Vacation Bible School, you would talk about the flood, Noah and the flood. You say, yeah, we're talking about this children's story. Well, not really.
Yeah. Yeah.
Everybody died.
Yeah.
All right, kids, let's get a snack.
Yeah.
Not exactly. Yeah. Is this
one family made it, okay?
Yeah. You talk about David and Daniel in the lion's den and so on and so forth. I mean, these are not exactly children's stories, but they are memorable stories that at each age that you are, you can learn and grasp different details of that story and understand it a little bit better. So I think that each time that you preach, there's something for everybody. You just have to do your best to try to highlight these different parts and sometimes just preaching it itself, each person is going to resonate with different people. Sure. Differently as well. So you try to give the application to approach all, but certainly it will happen naturally, depending upon where that person is in their lives.
That's a great point. And it is the living word. And so as we preach it, it's going to prick hearts, open hearts, obviously. So, and doing the best that we can do from a pulpit's, point of view, if you will, from our vantage point, trying to reach each group that's in an audience certainly is a difficult task, or can be a difficult task. But I think you hit the nail on the head when you said simplicity. It's just keep things simple and not trying to preach above someone's head. That's right. Putting it down here, the youngest are going to get it. And like you say, each of those stories, and I know how we use that term, but as we read through scripture and you're reading those different events, those were life events for different people. But like you say, there's something to be learned at each age group, at each maturity level in the congregation. So that's a great way to point that. And Jesus is certainly the master teacher. Yeah.
Yeah, I've often thought about how the greatest compliment a preacher ever gets is, that was so simple. That is truly the greatest compliment. I mean, to be called a scholar, I guess, can make you feel good, but it doesn't actually benefit people. I've thought about this a lot. When you're doing a devotional setting, or you're doing a camp setting, or you're doing a church setting where there's a large crowd, there's a lot of different age groups there. What Brother Curtis Cates always said, we were not privileged, you and I, to have him as an instructor. Right. You were. And so I'm sure you probably heard him make the statement before, put it where the calves can get it. Yeah. If the calves can eat, so can the cows. And that's the idea of putting it on a level that everyone understands. And sometimes, admittedly, I sit and listen to podcasts or sermons or devotionals or a lot of things, and I think, this is highbrow. And there's nothing wrong with highbrow, but maybe it's too highbrow. Yeah. And so the idea of hitting all age groups, I remember we were traveling somewhere with the family, and just someone happened to do a Devo that night that was not me. I was doing the Bible class, but not the Devo. And the person that did the Devo talked about a subject and Adam asked me about it. And I was like, man, I was not ready to cover that subject with my son yet. And I'm not, he's 7, at the time, or 6. He's not ready to talk about death to this same level as someone else is. And so I think the idea of the understanding that there's everybody there is on a different level in their journey of faith. Some are not yet Christians. They're young. Some are toward the very end of their life. And so you kind of balance it out as best you can. I like how you described that, though, I've always thought it is funny. Let's do Vacation Bible School. And we want it to be uplifting. We want to do that. Let's talk about all of the horrifying stories from the Old Testament. And you can talk about them.
Yeah.
But I mean, when you have a 6-year-old in a class and you talk about the flood, that 6-year-old, if they're smart enough to do so, they'll put the pieces together and go, well, what happened to all the other people? Well, they all died. And so don't be unrighteous or you might drown too. That's a terrifying thing to do, but there's a balance to it.
Yeah.
And I think that is the crux of the next question we have here is, should you target audiences or stay general? Because there's a double-edged sword here. So what would you say about that?
I think that there's certainly time and places to target certain topics, certain things, certain demographics, certain things that you might be dealing with. So I think there's a place for it, for us to, target. But there, in our targeting, is there always going to be an opportunity to still speak to others? When you think about really any of the epistles that we have in the New Testament, as Paul writes, he writes to specific audiences. He writes for specific causes and for different things that are happening in different churches. He writes to Timothy, he writes to Titus, he writes to Philemon. So he writes all these different people for different reasons, but yet they are so general that they apply to us even today. And so if we go and preach on marriage, though I'm preaching to an audience that is for married people, single people still can benefit from the lesson and understanding, hey, marriage is one day hopefully on your agenda. For God says it's not good for man to be alone. So hopefully one day you'll be headed in this direction and you'll see how this is supposed to go, how it should go, how we should enter into the marriage. And so whatever kind of topic you want to talk about, it always can be beneficial to everybody in some way, shape, fashion, or form. So even if we talk about Christianity, it does not exclude the non-Christian from the message. We want you to be invited. We want you to be a part of this. You're not yet there, but the invitation will be there for you to be a part of it so that you might understand what Christianity is truly about.
Yeah, and you certainly, I talked with a preacher one time. He was going through the books of the Bible. And he called me and he said, I've been going through the books of the Bible in the afternoon. It was Bradley. He's over there. Song of Solomon is coming up. What do I do? And we talked about it for a little bit. And there is a balanced approach to that of, you're not going to get into all of the details of Song of Solomon in a mixed congregational setting. As you might say to the elders, let's have a spouse class where we'll talk about the book of Song of Solomon, or let's have a class where my wife and I will teach. My wife will teach the women and I'll teach the men. You can facilitate easier conversations on a subject like that. It's also the same thing with certain subjects, the same way with, my favorite one, premillennialism. Not every kid's going to know what premillennialism is, and they might listen to a sermon on that. What do we want them to take away from that? Well, you're going to be specific in some ways because you have to be about the doctrine, but you want to be general enough that a child could walk away and go, we will not reign on earth for 1,000 years. God's not going to be here with us for 1,000 years. We're all going to heaven. That's the idea of being specific versus targeting. But I also think it makes me chuckle. There's a video years ago that was done where it's a pastor getting up in front of the congregation and he just goes, you guys are bad. And he starts just ranting and he goes, Dave is the worst.
He's the worst.
And then he just says the word of the Lord. And then he goes, sits down. Well, that's also the other end of the spectrum there, being too specific. We never want to get in the pulpit and say, today we're talking about alcohol. And I think we all know who we're really talking about. And so you balance it, right? You're trying to find the right way to say the truth and say it accurately. But sometimes, as we all know, it's not in the question for today, but it is something that happens when you have to call out a brother for being in sin, as does sometimes occur. You've gone through the Matthew 18 process. You've reached the point where you may have to withdraw fellowship. That's going to be tough for a congregation, especially if the preacher is always seen as, man, he just always name calls every week. And I've brought this point up already this week, but I'll bring it up again in our filming in this summer. In 1 Corinthians 6, 9 through 11, Paul did not say, after he listed all those things, he didn't say, and Sister Sally, you dealt with that. And Sister, Susan and Brother Tim and Joe, you dealt with all that. You were dealing with it. He just said, such were some of you. Yeah. And I think there's a balance there when we see the word rebuke in 2 Timothy 4:2. It doesn't just mean rebuke a person. That happens according to Galatians 2 and verses 10, 11, where he was withstanding Peter to the face because he deserved to be blamed. But Paul also, by 1 Corinthians 6, says, sometimes you just rebuke sin. Yeah. And you rebuke it in such a generic way that people in the audience could say, oh, I'm dealing with that. I should change. You don't always have to say someone's name to get the point across that sin is wrong. There are times where you do. Alexander the coppersmith did me much evil, but most of Paul's writings were not, let me take the time to list every single person that is an enemy of Christ. And John did it best when he made the statement of, those who are against Christ are just simply anti-Christ. They're all in one category. You're just against the Lord. Yeah.
I think sometimes, if we get too specific and too targeted, we miss the impact that we're intended to have. The gospel goes far beyond what we can imagine the power it possesses. And so when you speak to sin, you're going to, without a doubt, speak to a multitude of people. And so you never know who you are affecting. It might be the person you least expect.
It usually is.
Yeah, the person you least expect to be affected by this specific message, you might have just saved them tremendously. Yeah. And so, we just try to, like you said, preach in a general sense. Sin is sin, and we'd be foolish to think that anyone is excluded from sin or from that propensity to fall into temptation and the sin. So, just keeping it general, specific, maybe to certain issues or certain sins, but we don't necessarily have to, like you said, target people in order to get the message across.
Right.
Yeah. And one more thing, we don't preach for the favorites in the congregation, right?
No.
We can't do that. We talked about that on this season anyways, but just as a reminder, preaching to the back row means even if someone on the back row is my friend, I'm going to have to preach what's true. And, sometimes you might have to have a statement where you talk to that brother or sister beforehand and say, I just want you to know this is coming. I've been asked to preach on this, and I hope that you know that I love you. I hope that you know that I'm in your corner if you'll serve the Lord, but we got some things we should work on. I'm here for you. How can I help? But, you don't preach for favorites and show partiality. Yeah. You'll miss the back row if you'll understand the reference of what we're talking about today, tongue in cheek, if you do that.
Yeah. And because we are, this is a program that is to help preachers and also help congregations understand about preaching. I think it's important too, to just mention, you're talking about, preaching through Song of Solomon and such as that, and dealing with marriage and how one might treat that text and so forth. Well, imagine a single guy, trying to just preach about marriage, and so he can certainly do that. Does he have the experience of it yet? No, but the scripture gives us enough information for a man to cover and to know and to be able to preach it. And so sometimes he might be more general in a sense in covering the topic, but he can still cover the truth of the matter and deal with the gospel in that as that. So I think there are times that it's going to be general. There are times that it's going to be specific, and the wisdom is knowing when that is going to be, I think, in our preaching. And so part of this, even in our audience, we have really young people, children, we would say. So not just teenagers, but younger in our audience. And we've kind of already alluded to this, talking about, the children's Bible stories and things like that, but how do we best reach them? I think in our preaching, is there a way to accomplish that? I'm I'm a proponent of having them in the worship service and for them to hear the gospel, for them to hear the preaching that is done, for them to be in worship and not set off into another location. But as preachers, then how do we handle that?
There's so many ways that you can attempt to handle that. I mean, I don't think there's no perfect way. Children are children.
Yeah.
And their attention spans will be their attention spans. Right. But I know some ways that we've tried to help with some of that. Children like to be active.
Right.
And there's probably not many ways around that. So what we've tried to do is give them some active work. And the active work is paying attention to the sermon. We have these sheets that we will create for the children based on my sermon. Or some parents will tell the children, hey, they ask for keywords from my sermon and I give it to them. And these children will come and they will count how many times I say this word or that word. And they'll come back and tell me at the end what that was about. What that word meant and how many times I said it. I said, wow, you really were, so it's only so much that some children can grasp from your sermon. But I think helping them to key in on certain things is a positive note. They were paying attention to some sort. They are benefiting in some area. It's just building them up is what we really want to accomplish with children, setting them up in the right direction. As the Lord says, train a child in the way that they should go. Right. And when they're older, they'll have these good habits and be able to understand a little bit better.
Right. And part of that education, of course, parents, their task, and I always try to encourage our young families, especially to remind them, look, this is the season that you're in with young children and your attention span is going to be drawn away toward them as well. And so they're going to not always get everything. And they struggle with that, I know. And so sometimes visuals certainly help that for even a young mom to be able to keep up with at least the main points of a lesson, right? And to be able to stay somewhat engaged, even though she's wrangling and wrestling sometimes, a young one. But at the very same time, giving them a task to do is starting to train them to pay attention to them, to see, and then also see mom and dad sitting next to them is part of that education for that child as well. And so, and I always try to remind those parents that you may not get everything out of the sermon, but what you're also doing is training your child in how to worship God. And so that is part of that worship that's taking place. And so you are engaged, even if you're not really feeling like you're doing everything that you need to be doing. This is your season you're in. So
yeah. How old are your children, Anthony?
3 and 2 next week.
Yeah.
So 1 right now, but 2 next week.
So I tell people when I'm preaching, when Jesus made the statement, for example, in the parable of the sower, he who has ears to hear, let him hear. What Jesus is not saying there is, are you able to hear me? That's not Jesus' statement. I sometimes make the point, I have an 8-year-old at this time, I have an almost 4-year-old, and I have an about almost 9-month-old. Well, the 9-month-old can hear me. She knows my voice. She has no clue what I'm saying. And my 3-year-old, almost 4-year-old, she can hear and understand a little bit more. We just dealt with the tragedy at the school, losing somebody. And my daughter was telling us as we were heading to the funeral, he has a new body. And so she's 3.
Wow.
And she's understanding because she's heard it preached that when you pass on, you're fit for a new body, you're fit for eternity. And that's what is coming for him. And so it's the understanding of like, man, she's grasping it more. My son is going to turn, I think 9 this year. Man, that's crazy. But he's grasping things on a level that is also wild sometimes. He will say things and I will go, when did you get that? And it's right. It's accurate. Right. And so it's an understanding of this that I just want to make this point, as I know you understand it, having a 3-year-old, almost 2-year-old. I can't sit my 3-year-old down and reason with her to the same level I can my son, or my 9-month-old the same way I could my 3-year-old. Right. But it is impressive to me that we sometimes have as a notion of taking children out of worship services because they grasp nothing, and that we're going to put them in their own thing and we're going to let them do their own thing. I want to push back on that for this reason, respectfully. If my 3-year-old daughter knows that someone who dies is being fit for a new body, that means she's been paying attention to a sermon, to a Bible class, to us training her at home. And that means that if a 3-year-old can grasp that, they can be in the worship service. And one thing I just want to say as a throwaway, and I'll give you guys 2 minutes to talk about it too, but if we don't train them how to sit and worship at a young age, how will they be ready to sit and worship when they're expected to?
Right.
What do y'all have to say as far as that's concerned with trying to rear children in the right direction of, but they can do it, right? There has to be a way that we can balance. Now, children have to be taken out sometimes, but I think God understands that.
Right.
Y'all have anything you want to add to that?
Well, my children were never taken out to play. That's for certain.
Sure.
And to the point that, of course, I was probably, I'm sure I was in the pulpit during all of this, but, and I've seen them being carried down the aisle, by their mom. And Matthew on one occasion going, "No, Mom, don't spank me. Don't spank me." He knew what was coming, Chris, I'm sure he had to be taken out some. But the idea that all of that is part of the training, and so you can't just expect someone else to train them while you go off to worship. Mm-hmm. I and the lad will go yonder and worship, Abraham said of Isaac, with him. He was probably not 3 years old. He was a little bit older,
Sure.
obviously, but, the point was that, it was about a family being together to go to worship. And I always think about even Jesus when he's teaching, we always jump to the feeding of the 5,000 and all that, but you remember they were set down in groups, and there were men, women, and children in that. And so there were children that were also listening to Jesus, obviously, because he said, "Let the little ones come unto me," and on another occasion. And so there's a way to teach them and to train them. So that was just something to think about.
You got anything you want to add?
Yeah. I think we kind of set them up for a false reality when we continue to take them out and it becomes fun time.
Yeah.
And so when it becomes more difficult to separate them from fun time as they continue to grow and develop, because now I never want to be in worship because I want to be in fun time.
Right.
That's what you're actually training them for, right?
That's right.
So we're setting them up for a false reality, because now we're like, okay, you're 14 and we want you to come to service.
Right.
And they're like, no,
I don't want to be there.
I enjoy the other way so much better. And they begin to resent now having to sit and worship because feels like punishment.
Yeah.
And it's not, and never intended to be punishment. This is something that we do as a family. This is something we do to glorify God. Yeah. And that has to start early. And they need to understand, hey, when I take you out, the intent is not that we stay out. The intent is that we go back in and you behave. Right. You should not want to go out because that means it's discipline time. Mm-hmm. And discipline, as you said, is just training. That means I love you. I'm showing you, hey, there's a certain way we have to do things when we're inside of worship. Right. And this is a time for us to be attentive, for us to remain quiet, not disruptive, and give God the glory that he's due. So, we have to take them out sometimes, but we just keep trying. We just keep working, working.
Right. Absolutely.
Till we get past those stages.
Yeah. Well, thank you for being with us today. And we're glad that we've had the time this summer to study with you. We'll be back next summer, Lord willing, with more content on the Scattered Abroad Network. Just as some housekeeping matters, one of the reasons that we do the summer the way that we do is there's a lot of youth activities and church events that take place during the summer. And we want our hosts to be able to attend those and not have to worry about recording a podcast in the last minute to get it turned in on time. And so Wayne and I are more mobile in our ministry, and we take the opportunity to get together and do this so that they don't have to. We're always blessed to have the ministers that have sat down with us this season and that sit down with us and discuss the matters of the scriptures. We are going to have our new content coming out next week on the Scattered Abroad Network. Our fall shows will be starting, and so you can catch those as well. I'll be finishing up a secondary portion this fall of the book of 1 John. And so we'll be finishing the book of 1 John and text takeaways as well as so many other things. So be looking out for all of your content that you want to consume on the Scattered Abroad Network. You can download our app if you have an iPhone. If you don't have an iPhone, go get one. We can get you the app in that way. We're still working on Android, but we're looking forward to maybe seeing you at Polishing the Pulpit. You can come by our booth and see us and see all of the things that we're doing at SAN, and especially at the Memphis School of Preaching. We're so blessed to have the school as an overseer of this work, and we always want to give back to them in any way that we can. Until the next time we're together, this Thursday, we'll be back with Anthony for Did That Really Happen? For us, it'll be in about 10 minutes. We'll be finishing or starting that program. For you, it'll be a few days. But until next year for Before the Pulpit, take care and God bless.